Her fiancé and her parents publicly mocked her late mother at the rehearsal dinner, so she called off the wedding in front of everyone without a second thought. Hi, my beautiful family. On this holy Sunday, may the Lord stretch forth his mighty hand upon you, filling your homes with peace, your hearts with unshakable faith, and your souls with joy that no storm can steal. May every closed door open before you, may every sorrow turn to laughter, and may his angels walk beside you in every step of life. Amen. If you are here, write present. If you feel this sacred bond, write, I am with Mr. Peter. My beloved family, these stories are not just tales. They are prayers from my heart, woven for you with love and sacrifice. But when you leave before the end, it breaks me. It feels as if my hard work and devotion mean nothing. Please stay with me till the last word, for every moment is a gift for you. My beautiful family, I ask for a special gift from you, that my daughter-in-law may bless me by naming my grandson Peter Jr. If your heart is with me, please write in the comments, Peter Jr. Your words will be my treasure, and together we will keep this blessing alive. The most dangerous predators in Manhattan's financial district don't carry weapons. They carry Harvard MBAs and generational wealth. Dr. Jasmine Charm adjusted her deliberately modest blazer as she stepped into the marble-veined lobby of Ford Industries Tower, her Columbia PhD in economics hidden behind carefully practiced uncertainty. 6 months of research had led to this moment, the beginning of the most expensive psychological experiment in corporate history. You're here for the marketing coordinator position? The receptionist's tone carried that particular brand of Manhattan condescension reserved for those who didn't belong in glass towers that kissed the clouds. Yes, ma'am. Jasmine Charm. She let her voice waver slightly, watching how quickly the woman's attention shifted to more important things. The kind of dismissal Jasmine had spent 3 decades observing from wealth's opposite side. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the Hudson River sparkled like scattered diamonds. This building, with its pretentious gold fixtures and intimidating architectural statements, represented everything her mother had fought against before a suspicious car accident silenced her forever. But Jasmine wasn't here for revenge. Revenge was messy and temporary. She was here for something far more sophisticated: transformation. Mr. Ford will see you now. The announcement came after precisely 47 minutes, a power play as predictable as rush-hour gridlock. Bruce Ford's corner office occupied more square footage than most apartments, decorated with understated luxury that screamed old money. Harvard rowing trophies lined mahogany shelves, while a Rothko painting dominated the wall behind his desk. Not because he understood art, but because his decorator had insisted it projected sophisticated authority. Please, sit. Bruce gestured to a chair positioned deliberately lower than his own, a psychological dominance technique as ancient as corporate hierarchies. At 36, he possessed effortless attractiveness that came from never questioning whether doors would open. They always had. They always would. Tell me about yourself, Jasmine. He leaned back, fingers steepled, already categorizing her into familiar types. Projects he could save, conquests that would boost his ego, decorative accessories that enhanced his image. Jasmine had spent months studying his psychology through public interviews, corporate filings, even his Harvard roommate's social media posts. Bruce Ford was a man who had never built anything himself, but inherited an empire constructed on other people's displacement. He dated women he could rescue because equals threatened his carefully constructed identity as benevolent patriarch. Well, I graduated from Queen's College with a business degree, she began, letting her hands fidget with her resume, a masterfully crafted document that told just enough truth to avoid detection while hiding the $3.2 billion empire she'd built from nothing. I've been working in small marketing firms, but I've always dreamed of working somewhere significant. somewhere that matters. The slight breathlessness in her voice, the way her eyes widened when she surveyed his office, every gesture was calculated to trigger his savior complex. Bruce Ford was about to fall in love with a woman who didn't exist, and Jasmine would document every moment of his psychological unraveling. Queen's College. He nodded with that particular smile wealthy men use when encountering someone they consider charmingly inferior. That's wonderful. Sometimes the best perspectives come from unconventional backgrounds. Through the office's smart glass, Jasmine could see her actual assistant, Helena Rodriguez, sitting in the lobby disguised as her former supervisor, ready to provide references if needed. Helena held an MBA from Wharton and managed a portfolio worth more than Bruce's annual salary, but today she played a struggling small business owner, grateful for any opportunity to help a former employee. "I have to ask," Bruce continued, "what draws you specifically to Ford Industries? We're quite different from the smaller firms you've worked with." This was the moment Jasmine had prepared for. The question that would set the entire psychological experiment in motion. "Honestly, I researched your company's history, and I was amazed by how you've built something that helps people. All those residential developments, the jobs you've created. I just want to be part of something bigger than myself." The irony was exquisite. Ford Industries' residential developments had displaced hundreds of families through predatory practices and deliberate gentrification. The jobs he'd created often paid wages that trapped workers in poverty cycles, but Bruce's face lit up like she'd just confirmed his most cherished beliefs about his own benevolence. "That's exactly the thinking we need here." He leaned forward, already casting himself as Henry Higgins to her Eliza Doolittle. "I believe in giving opportunities to people who might not otherwise have them. Sometimes raw talent and hunger matter more than pedigree." Jasmine nodded enthusiastically, while mentally calculating how much his company's stock would drop when she revealed their discriminatory lending practices to the Securities and Exchange Commission. But that revelation would come later, after she'd answered the question that had haunted her since her mother's death. Could a man raised in privilege ever truly love a woman as an equal, or would he always need the psychological comfort of feeling superior? "I should mention," Bruce said, retrieving his phone, "I'd like to introduce you to my mother and sister this weekend. They're particular about the people I work closely with. Would you be available for dinner? Somewhere nice, of course. My treat." The casual assumption that she couldn't afford somewhere nice was exactly the psychological tell Jasmine had expected. In reality, she probably owned whichever restaurant he chose. Her hospitality empire controlled 43 upscale dining establishments across Manhattan alone. "That would be wonderful," she replied, letting just enough gratitude seep into her voice to stroke his ego. "I'll try not to embarrass you." "Impossible," Bruce said with confidence that comes from never being truly challenged. "I have an eye for potential." As Jasmine left his office, her phone buzzed with a text from her head of security. "The Washington Post reporter is ready for the Ford Industries story. Should we proceed?" "Not yet," she typed back. The experiment was just beginning. Walking through the lobby, Jasmine caught her reflection in polished marble and saw not the struggling marketing coordinator Bruce believed he was saving, but the architect of his coming transformation. She had built an empire by understanding people's deepest motivations. Bruce Ford was about to become her most important case study. The elevator doors closed on Manhattan's glittering financial district, and Jasmine allowed herself one small smile. Phase 1 was complete. Bruce Ford thought he was interviewing a potential employee. He had no idea he was falling in love with his own Judgment Day. Chapter 2. The Social Architecture. In Manhattan's elite circles, the most expensive real estate isn't measured in square footage, it's measured in the power to exclude. The Knickerbocker Club's dining room hadn't changed its decor since 1871, and its membership policies had evolved only marginally more. As Bruce guided Jasmine through mahogany-paneled corridors lined with portraits of deceased white patriarchs, she mentally calculated that she'd purchased this building's mortgage through a shell company 6 months earlier, making her technically Bruce's landlord for this performance. Founded in 1871, Bruce explained, his hand resting possessively on her lower back as they walked. Some of New York's most influential families have been members for generations. There's usually a 20-year waiting list. What he omitted was that the influential families had systematically excluded anyone whose skin color, religion, or bank account balance failed to meet their standards until lawsuits forced superficial changes in the 1990s. Jasmine had read the club's actual membership files, purchased discreetly through her private investigation firm, and knew exactly which members still harbored old prejudices behind polished smiles and carefully modulated voices. "It's magnificent," she said, letting appropriate awe color her voice while noting which staff members subtly straightened their postures when she passed. Her hospitality empire employed over 3,000 people across the city, and she'd built her reputation by treating workers with dignity these establishment families had never learned to extend. The maitre d', Jonathan Park, approached with obsequious attention usually reserved for the club's most significant donors. "Mr. Ford, what a pleasure, your usual table." "Perfect, Jonathan. And please take excellent care of my guest. She's new to the club." Jonathan's eyes flicked to Jasmine with professional assessment, and she caught the moment of recognition he quickly suppressed. As the club's head of hospitality, he received monthly reports from Charm Enterprises' auditing firm. He knew exactly who was really paying his salary, but discretion was why she compensated him extraordinarily well. "Of course, sir. It would be my honor to ensure Ms. Charm enjoys every aspect of her dining experience." The slight emphasis on her surname was subtle enough that Bruce missed it entirely, but Jasmine filed it away as evidence of Jonathan's professionalism. She'd need to give him a bonus for that performance. Their table overlooked Central Park, where autumn had painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Jasmine of her mother's favorite scarf. Ruby Charm had never set foot in establishments like this, not because she couldn't afford them, but because she'd spent her legal career fighting the systemic exclusion they represented. "So," Bruce said, after ordering wine without consulting her preferences, "tell me more about your family. I realized I don't know much about your background." This was the moment Jasmine had been preparing for since accepting his dinner invitation. The psychological experiment required careful calibration, reveal enough truth to maintain authenticity while concealing information that would shatter his comfortable assumptions about their relationship dynamic. "My mother was a lawyer," she said, allowing genuine emotion to enter her voice. "She died when I was 17, a car accident. The accident that wasn't an accident, according to the private investigator she'd hired to examine police files. The accident that happened the night before Ruby was scheduled to present evidence of Ford Industries' discriminatory practices to a federal grand jury, but Bruce didn't need those details yet. "I'm sorry for your loss." His sympathy seemed genuine, filtered through the lens of someone who'd never lost anything irreplaceable. That must have been incredibly difficult. Was she in private practice? Civil rights law. She mostly represented families who were being displaced from their homes. Jasmine watched Bruce's face carefully, noting how his expression remained politely interested without any flicker of recognition. He had no idea his family's empire had been built on the very displacement his mother had fought against. "That's admirable work," he said, sipping wine that cost more per bottle than many people earned weekly. "Though I imagine it wasn't very lucrative?" The casual assumption that civil rights lawyers were motivated by poverty rather than principle revealed everything Jasmine needed to know about Bruce's worldview. In reality, Ruby Charm had been financially comfortable. Her legal victories against discriminatory landlords and predatory developers had earned substantial settlements, but she'd donated most earnings to legal aid organizations, believing justice shouldn't be a luxury available only to the wealthy. She always said the work itself was the reward, Jasmine replied, letting a trace of defensiveness creep into her voice, the kind of response Bruce would expect from someone sensitive about their family's financial struggles. Of course, Bruce agreed quickly, recognizing he'd touched a nerve. I didn't mean to imply, look, I think it's wonderful that she dedicated herself to helping people. That kind of commitment takes real character. The condescension in his tone was so perfectly calibrated that Jasmine almost admired it. Bruce had mastered the art of appearing supportive while simultaneously reinforcing social hierarchies. He could praise her mother's character while implying that such character was the consolation prize for those who couldn't achieve actual success. "Thank you," she said, allowing gratitude to warm her voice. "It means a lot to hear you say that. Sometimes I worry that people in your world might think that kind of work is naive." "My world?" Bruce laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Jasmine, you're part of my world now. That's the beautiful thing about America. Anyone can rise above their circumstances with hard work and the right opportunities." The irony was so thick Jasmine could practically taste it. Bruce Ford, heir to a fortune built on other people's displacement, lecturing her about rising above circumstances while she sat across from him worth more than his entire family's net worth. But this was exactly the psychological data she needed, confirmation that his attraction to her was rooted in his perception of himself as her savior. "I hope so," she said, letting vulnerability make her voice smaller. "Sometimes I feel like I'm pretending to belong in places like this." "You belong anywhere I say you belong," Bruce replied with casual authority that revealed how thoroughly he misunderstood the nature of their relationship. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Across the dining room, Jasmine noticed Amanda Sterling, Bruce's ex-girlfriend and pharmaceutical fortune heiress, watching their table with barely concealed hostility. Amanda had been Bruce's most recent attempt at a relationship between equals, and their breakup had reportedly been mutual recognition that they were too similar to sustain romantic interest. Amanda understood Bruce's psychology because she shared it. The casual assumption of superiority that came from never having their worldview challenged. "Is that woman staring at us?" Jasmine asked, injecting just enough insecurity into her voice to trigger Bruce's protective instincts. Bruce followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's Amanda Sterling. We used to date. She's probably just curious about you." "She's beautiful," Jasmine said, noting how Amanda's tailored Chanel suit and platinum jewelry projected exactly the kind of effortless wealth Bruce had been raised to expect from romantic partners. "She looks like she belongs here." "Beauty isn't just about appearance," Bruce said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Amanda belongs here because she was born here. You belong here because you're exceptional enough to earn it." The distinction revealed everything. Amanda belonged by birthright. Jasmine belonged by his grace. It was exactly the psychological dynamic she'd hypothesized, confirming that Bruce was incapable of loving a woman he perceived as his equal. He needed the emotional satisfaction of believing he was elevating someone deserving but inferior. "Mr. Ford," Jonathan appeared beside their table with perfectly timed interruption. "I apologize for the intrusion, but there's a phone call for Ms. Charm at the front desk. Something about a family emergency." Jasmine's heart rate didn't change. This was Helena executing the next phase of their plan, but she allowed panic to flash across her features. "A family emergency? I don't understand." "Go ahead," Bruce said immediately, his protective instincts fully activated. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait here." As Jasmine followed Jonathan through the dining room, She felt Amanda Sterling's gaze tracking her movement. Amanda's psychological profile suggested she was intelligent enough to sense that something about this situation didn't align with surface appearances. That suspicion could be useful later. Amanda might inadvertently expose truths Bruce was too blinded by his savior complex to see. At the front desk, Jonathan handed her a phone with practiced discretion. "Helena," she said, modulating her voice to carry just enough worry for anyone nearby to overhear. "Phase 2 complete," Helena's voice confirmed through the earpiece. "His mother, Catherine, has already started preliminary background research. Should I feed her the false information about your mother's case files?" "Not yet. Let her think she's discovering organically. The psychological impact will be stronger if she believes she's uncovered secrets rather than being handed them." "Understood. Also, Amanda Sterling just texted someone. Want me to intercept?" Jasmine glanced back toward their table, where Bruce was checking his phone with the distracted air of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Number let her suspicions develop naturally. The experiment requires authentic reactions. When she returned to Bruce, her eyes were appropriately red-rimmed from the glycerin drops Helena had provided. "I'm so sorry," she said, letting her voice waver. "My aunt had a fall. She's in the hospital, and I'm the only family she has left." "Don't apologize," Bruce said immediately, standing to help her with her chair. "Do you need to go to her? I can drive you or arrange a car service or—" "You've done so much already," Jasmine interrupted, allowing gratitude to overwhelm her composure. "I can take the subway to Queens. It's faster during rush hour anyway." The suggestion that she would take public transportation to handle a family crisis was precisely the trigger she'd expected. Bruce's face shifted through a series of micro-expressions: concern, protectiveness, and that subtle satisfaction that came from being needed by someone he perceived as vulnerable. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "I'm driving you myself. Family comes first, Jasmine. Everything else can wait." As they left the Knickerbocker Club, Jasmine noted how the staff's attention shifted when Bruce wrapped his arm around her shoulders, not because they found the interracial relationship noteworthy, but because they recognized the dynamic of powerful man protecting grateful woman. It was a performance they'd witnessed countless times, and their practiced indifference confirmed that Bruce's romantic patterns were boringly predictable. In his Tesla, driving through Manhattan traffic toward a Queens hospital where Helena had arranged for Aunt Margaret to be treated for a minor fall, Jasmine allowed herself to study Bruce's profile. He was genuinely handsome, genuinely concerned about her fabricated crisis, and genuinely convinced that his willingness to drive to Queens demonstrated the depth of his character. He had no idea that the woman sitting beside him owned more New York real estate than his family, employed more people than his company, and was documenting his every psychological response for a study that would fundamentally challenge everything he believed about himself. "Thank you," she said quietly, letting sincerity color her gratitude, because despite the deception, despite the experiment, despite everything she was concealing, Bruce's kindness in this moment was real. The tragedy was that his kindness was conditional on her apparent inferiority. "You don't need to thank me," Bruce replied, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "This is what people who care about each other do." Through the Tesla's panoramic roof, the city's towers stretched endlessly skyward. But Jasmine was beginning to understand that the most sophisticated prisons were built not with bars and walls, but with assumptions and expectations that felt like protection until you tried to exceed them. The strategic deception was entering its most dangerous phase, the one where the observer risked becoming emotionally invested in the subject's transformation, even if that transformation might be impossible. Chapter 3: The Proposal Trap. The most expensive mistakes in Manhattan are made by men who confuse generosity with love and mistake gratitude for devotion. 8 months of psychological choreography had led to this moment. Bruce Ford, kneeling in Central Park's Bethesda fountain area, presenting his grandmother's emerald ring to a woman worth more than his entire family fortune. The autumn sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, while tourists discreetly photographed what they assumed was a genuine romantic gesture rather than the culmination of the most elaborate social experiment in Manhattan's recent history. "Jasmine," Bruce said, his voice carrying rehearsed emotion that suggested he'd practiced this speech multiple times before his bathroom mirror. "These past 8 months have shown me what I've been missing my entire life. You've taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your world. It's about creating a new world together." The irony was exquisite. Bruce believed he was creating something new while following a psychological script older than the trust funds that had shaped his worldview. Jasmine had documented every phase of his courtship strategy: the expensive restaurants where he'd introduced her to fine dining, the cultural events where he'd educated her about art and classical music, the exclusive boutiques where he'd helped her develop more sophisticated fashion sense. Each gesture had reinforced his fundamental assumption that their relationship was an act of benevolent transformation, him elevating her from Queen's College graduate to suitable companion for Manhattan's elite circles. He'd never questioned why she adapted so quickly to environments he expected would intimidate her, never wondered how she seemed to intuitively understand social nuances that should have taken years to master. "You don't have to answer now," Bruce continued, still holding the ring his grandmother had worn through 60 years of marriage to railroad wealth. "I know this is overwhelming, and I know my family can be challenging. But I want you to know that you'll never have to worry about financial security again. I want to take care of you the way you deserve." There it was, the psychological core of his proposal. Not a partnership between equals, but a protective arrangement where her gratitude would balance his generosity. Bruce was offering to rescue her from circumstances he'd imagined, solving problems she'd never had, providing security she'd never lacked. "Yes," Jasmine said, allowing tears to gather in her eyes while mentally calculating how much his family's stock portfolio would lose when she revealed their discriminatory lending practices to federal investigators. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring slid onto her finger with perfect fit, because she'd had Helena research the exact specifications months earlier when she'd first begun studying Bruce's psychological patterns. Every detail of their relationship had been orchestrated, from their accidental meeting at his company to this carefully staged moment of romantic commitment. As Bruce lifted her in celebration, spinning her around while onlookers applauded their presumed fairy tale, Jasmine caught sight of her reflection in the fountain's surface. For just a moment, she saw not the calculating strategist who'd engineered this elaborate deception, but the 17-year-old girl whose mother had died the night before, exposing Ford Industries' systematic destruction of families who looked like theirs. "I love you," Bruce whispered against her ear, and the tragedy was that he meant it. He loved the woman he believed her to be, grateful, dependent, thankful for his protection and elevation. He was psychologically incapable of loving the woman she actually was, his intellectual equal, his financial superior, his moral judge. "I love you too," she replied, because within the parameters of their relationship, it was true. She loved his capacity for kindness, even if that kindness was conditional on her apparent inferiority. She loved his genuine desire to protect her, even if his protection was based on fundamental misunderstanding of who needed protecting whom. That evening, at Bruce's Tribeca penthouse, they celebrated with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. The apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Hudson River, while its modern furniture and carefully curated art collection projected exactly the kind of sophisticated wealth that Bruce assumed she'd never experienced before. "My parents want to meet you properly," Bruce said, refilling their glasses with Dom Perignon 2008. I thought we could have dinner this weekend. Somewhere special. Maybe Daniel or Le Bernardin. Jasmine owned controlling interests in both restaurants through her hospitality empire, but Bruce's suggestion revealed his continued assumption that exposure to fine dining was a gift he was bestowing rather than an environment where she wielded more actual power than his family name carried. That sounds wonderful, she said, settling into his arms on the Italian leather sofa that probably cost more than her fabricated annual salary. Are you sure they'll approve of me? I know I'm not what they expected for you. They'll love you, Bruce said with confidence of someone who'd never had his family's approval genuinely threatened. My mother can be particular, but she'll see what I see. Someone with real substance, someone who's earned everything she has. The casual assumption that she'd earned her position in his life through suffering and struggle, rather than building an empire that dwarfed his family's achievements, perfectly encapsulated Bruce's worldview. He could only conceive of her worth in terms of overcoming disadvantages, not creating advantages. Tell me about them, Jasmine said, though she'd already conducted extensive research on Catherine and Richard Ford through her private investigation firm. Catherine, daughter of former Ambassador Preston Mitchell, had married into Ford money but never quite achieved the social prominence she believed her breeding deserved. Richard had inherited his empire but lacked the vision to expand it significantly, content to maintain rather than innovate. My mother is formidable, Bruce said, choosing his words carefully. She's very protective of family reputation, very concerned with how things appear publicly. She'll want to make sure you understand what being a Ford means. What being a Ford meant, according to Jasmine's research, was inheriting wealth built on systematic discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability about its sources. 3 generations of Fords had profited from housing practices that displaced minority families, commercial developments that destroyed established communities, and lending policies that trapped borrowers in cycles of dependency. I'll try not to embarrass you, Jasmine said, letting insecurity color her voice while mentally reviewing the federal case files that documented every illegal practice Ford Industries had employed over the past 30 years. Impossible, Bruce replied, kissing her forehead with patronizing affection of someone convinced he was providing emotional security to someone who desperately needed it. You could never embarrass me. You're going to be magnificent. Later that night, as Bruce slept beside her in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, Jasmine stared at the engagement ring catching moonlight from the skyline beyond their windows. The emerald was flawless, the setting exquisite, the craftsmanship exceptional. It was also a symbol of everything wrong with their relationship, beautiful, valuable, and completely misrepresentative of the actual power dynamics between them. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Helena. Catherine Ford hired Blackwater Investigations to research your background. Should we feed them false information about your mother's case files? Not yet, Jasmine typed back. Let her discover what she thinks she wants to know. The psychological impact will be stronger if she believes she's uncovered secrets rather than being handed them. Through the penthouse windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly in all directions, a city built on ambition, possibility, and the systematic exclusion of those deemed unsuitable for success. Jasmine had conquered this city not by following its rules, but by understanding them so thoroughly she could manipulate them to her advantage. But lying in Bruce's arms, wearing his grandmother's ring, she faced the experiment's most dangerous complication, the growing possibility that she was falling in love with the man she was systematically testing, not the condescending savior who believed he was rescuing her, but the decent human being trapped inside assumptions he'd never been forced to examine. The wedding was 3 months away. 3 months to complete the psychological experiment that would either transform Bruce Ford into someone capable of loving an equal or confirm that men raised in privilege could never escape the prison of their own superiority complex. 3 months to determine whether love could survive the complete destruction of its foundational illusions. Outside their window, Manhattan pulsed with energy and ambition, while somewhere in Queens, a memorial plaque marked the intersection where Dr. Ruby Charm had died the night before she could expose the Ford family's systematic destruction of families like hers. The most expensive test was about to be administered. Chapter 4. The Pre-Wedding Intelligence. In Manhattan's elite circles, information is the only currency more valuable than money, and the most dangerous secrets are often hiding in plain sight. Catherine Ford's Waterford crystal coffee cup trembled almost imperceptibly as she reviewed the preliminary investigation report on her son's fiancé. The document, delivered by Blackwater Investigation's most discreet operative, contained exactly the kind of information she'd expected to find about a Queens College graduate who'd somehow captured the attention of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. What she hadn't expected was how unsatisfying the answers felt. "The surface information checks out," Detective Marcus Webb explained, settling into the antique chair across from Catherine's mahogany desk in her Upper East Side study. Jasmine Charm, born in Queens, mother Ruby Charm, died in 2008. Father unknown. Attended Queens College on partial scholarship, worked for several small marketing firms before joining your son's company. "But," Catherine prompted, because 30 years of navigating Manhattan society had taught her to recognize when investigators were withholding uncomfortable truths. "But the deeper we dig, the more questions arise. Her college transcripts show exceptional academic performance. Honors Society, Dean's List every semester, graduation summa cum laude. That level of achievement typically indicates resources and support systems that don't align with her supposed background." Catherine made notes in the leather-bound journal where she tracked all family-related intelligence. The Ford family had maintained their position for 3 generations by anticipating threats before they materialized, and something about Jasmine Charm had triggered her most finely tuned instincts for social disruption. "What about her mother's death?" she asked, because the preliminary report had mentioned a car accident without providing details that satisfied her need for complete information. "This is where things become interesting," Webb continued, consulting his tablet with careful precision that suggested he was approaching sensitive territory. "Ruby Charm was killed in a single car accident on the FDR Drive in November 2008. Police report indicates she lost control during a rainstorm and struck a barrier." That seems straightforward enough. On the surface, yes, but Ruby Charm was a civil rights attorney who specialized in housing discrimination cases. The accident occurred the night before she was scheduled to present evidence to a federal grand jury about predatory lending practices in minority communities. Catherine's pen stopped moving. She looked up from her journal to study Webb's expression, noting the careful neutrality that investigators cultivated when delivering information that might implicate their clients in uncomfortable realities. "What kind of evidence?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Documents related to systematic discrimination in rental practices, deliberate targeting of minority families for predatory loans, and coordinated efforts to gentrify specific neighborhoods through strategic property acquisition." The room fell silent, except for the antique grandfather clock marking time with metallic precision. Catherine had been married to Richard Ford for 34 years, long enough to understand that their family fortune had been built on practices that couldn't withstand contemporary scrutiny. She'd never asked for specific details because plausible deniability was crucial for maintaining social standing in circles where moral superiority was assumed rather than examined. "Were there any companies specifically named in her investigation?" Catherine asked, though she dreaded confirmation of what Webb's expression had already revealed. Ford Industries was mentioned prominently in the preliminary evidence summary. The case files were reportedly stolen from her office the night of the accident, so we can't verify the specific allegations. But the federal prosecutor's notes indicate your husband's company was a primary focus of her investigation. Catherine set down her pen and walked to the study's windows, which offered carefully curated views of Central Park's most photogenic sections. Somewhere in those trees, her son had proposed to the daughter of a woman who had died investigating their family's business practices. The coincidence was either astronomically unlikely or catastrophically deliberate. "Is there any indication that Jasmine knows about her mother's investigation?" she asked, watching joggers and dog walkers navigate pathways that had been designed to project natural beauty while concealing the mechanical infrastructure that maintained such perfection. "No direct evidence, but—" Webb hesitated, consulting his notes with reluctance that suggested he was about to deliver information his client wouldn't want to hear. "There are some anomalies in her employment history that suggest she may have resources beyond what her resume indicates." "What kind of anomalies?" "Financial inconsistencies. She's listed as earning $45,000 annually at her previous positions, but her credit report shows payments on a Manhattan apartment rental that would require income closer to $200,000. Her wardrobe, based on surveillance photos, includes items that retail for more than her supposed monthly salary. More concerning, she's been photographed at charity events wearing jewelry that our experts value at over $50,000. Catherine felt her maternal instincts sharpening into predatory focus. "What kind of jewelry?" "Diamond earrings, pearl necklaces, a vintage Cartier watch, all pieces that suggest either substantial family wealth or financial support from someone with significant resources. The timing is also suspicious. She acquired most of these items during the months she's been dating your son." Catherine turned from the window to study Webb's expression. "Are you suggesting she has undisclosed income sources?" "I'm suggesting that someone is financially supporting her lifestyle, and we haven't identified who or how. It could be family money that doesn't show up in public records. It could be earnings from undisclosed employment, or it could be financial assistance from someone who prefers to remain anonymous." The implications hung in the air like expensive perfume, present but difficult to identify precisely. Catherine had spent decades navigating situations where surface appearances concealed complex realities, and every instinct she'd developed warned her that Jasmine Charm represented a threat that extended far beyond ordinary gold digging. "I want you to expand the investigation," she said, returning to her desk to write detailed instructions in her journal. "Focus on the financial inconsistencies. Find out who's supporting her lifestyle and why. And I want everything you can discover about Ruby Charm's case files, what evidence she had, who might have accessed it after her death, and whether any copies survived. That level of investigation will require significantly more resources," Webb warned. "Federal case files, especially those related to ongoing civil rights violations, are heavily protected. Accessing them could attract unwanted attention from federal investigators." "I'm not asking you to break any laws," Catherine replied, with careful diction that wealthy people used when they wanted results without explicitly requesting illegal methods. "I'm asking you to use all available legal resources to protect my family from potential threats." After Webb left, Catherine sat alone in her study, reviewing everything she knew about her son's romantic patterns. Bruce had always been attracted to women he could rescue: scholarship students, struggling artists, ambitious professionals from modest backgrounds. His savior complex was as predictable as his trust fund distributions, and normally she found his charitable romanticism harmless, if slightly embarrassing. But Jasmine Charm was different. She moved through elite social situations with confidence that seemed instinctive rather than learned. She asked questions that suggested familiarity with complex business concepts. She never seemed overwhelmed by luxury or intimidated by social expectations. Most troubling, she never displayed the gratitude that women in her supposed position typically showed when accepted into Manhattan's exclusive circles. Jasmine behaved like someone who belonged rather than someone grateful for inclusion. Catherine picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Amanda Sterling's number. Amanda had dated Bruce for 6 months before their mutual recognition that they were too similar to sustain romantic interest, but she remained a valuable source of intelligence about Manhattan's social dynamics. "Amanda, darling," Catherine said when the call connected, "I was hoping you might join me for lunch tomorrow. I'd love to get your perspective on Bruce's engagement." "Of course," Amanda replied, though something in her tone suggested she'd been expecting this conversation. "I assume you want to discuss the inconsistencies." Inconsistencies? In Jasmine's story. I've been watching her at social events, and there are details that don't align with what Bruce believes about her background. I think you should know what I've observed. Catherine smiled with satisfaction that came from confirmation of her own instincts. "Tomorrow at noon, then?" "The usual place." After ending the call, she returned to her study windows and the carefully maintained views of Central Park. Somewhere in the city beyond those trees, Jasmine Charm was either an exceptionally skilled opportunist or something far more dangerous. A woman with her own agenda who had systematically targeted the Ford family for reasons that remained mysteriously opaque. Catherine had protected her family's position for 3 decades by identifying threats before they materialized and neutralizing them before they could cause lasting damage. She had no intention of allowing her son's romantic naivete to compromise everything the Ford family had built. But as she reviewed her notes from Webb's investigation, Catherine couldn't shake the growing suspicion that this time she might be the one being manipulated by someone who understood the game better than she did. The wedding was 10 weeks away. 10 weeks to uncover the truth about Jasmine Charm before her son made what could be the most expensive mistake in the Ford family's history. Outside her window, Manhattan pulsed with evening energy, while somewhere in the shadows of steel and glass, the most sophisticated game of psychological warfare in the city's recent memory was entering its final phase. The rehearsal dinner would reveal everything. Chapter 5. The Rehearsal Dinner, Psychological Warfare. The Park Hyatt New York's ballroom had witnessed countless celebrations of Manhattan's elite, but never an execution disguised as a wedding rehearsal. 24 hours before her wedding, Jasmine Charm stood in the bridal suite adjusting pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, the only authentic detail in an evening choreographed for maximum psychological destruction. Through the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's skyline sparkled with deceptive beauty, while 3 floors below, Catherine Ford prepared to humiliate the daughter of the woman whose investigation had once threatened to destroy the Ford family empire. The Park Hyatt's ballroom could accommodate 300 guests in configurations designed to project either intimate elegance or imposing grandeur. Tonight, Catherine had chosen imposing grandeur. Crystal chandeliers that dominated sightlines, a head table positioned for maximum visibility, and acoustic design that ensured every word spoken would carry to the furthest corners of the room. "You look beautiful," Helena Rodriguez said, making final adjustments to Jasmine's midnight blue evening gown. As her chief of staff, Helena had orchestrated every detail of the evening's counter-surveillance operation, from discreet recording devices woven into the floral arrangements to security personnel positioned throughout the venue. "Any last-minute intelligence?" Jasmine asked, applying lipstick with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to endure. "Catherine's investigation firm delivered their final report this afternoon," Helena replied, consulting her tablet. "Based on intercepted communications, she believes she's discovered devastating information about your mother's death and your financial background. She's planning to reveal everything during her toast. And Bruce? He's rehearsed his own speech. Based on our surveillance, he's planning to join his mother's attack. He believes everything she's told him about your supposed deception. Helena's tone carried regret they both recognized. Bruce's transformation was about to fail spectacularly, confirming every cynical hypothesis about privileged men choosing comfort over love when tested. The ballroom's social geography had been carefully orchestrated to reinforce existing power structures. Manhattan's financial elite occupied tables near the head table, while less prominent guests were positioned progressively farther from the centers of influence. Every placement sent subtle messages about status, access, and belonging that guests would unconsciously absorb and remember. At the head table, Catherine Ford wore her authority like the Van Cleef sapphire necklace that had belonged to her own mother, inherited power that she'd learned to wield with devastating precision. Richard Ford sat beside her, reviewing notes for his own speech with the distracted attention of someone more comfortable with board meetings than social performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," the maître d'hôtel announced, as guests took their seats for the formal dinner portion of the evening. "The Ford family welcomes you to celebrate the upcoming union of Bruce and Jasmine." Jasmine took her seat beside Bruce, who squeezed her hand with what felt like protective affection, but carried an undercurrent of tension that suggested he knew something she didn't. Around them, Manhattan's elite settled into their chairs with practiced efficiency of people accustomed to events where social positioning mattered more than personal comfort. "You seem different tonight," Jasmine observed, noting how Bruce's attention kept drifting to his mother rather than focusing on their conversation. "Just wedding nerves," he replied, though something in his voice suggested he was rehearsing responses rather than expressing genuine emotion. "Tomorrow's a big day. Life-changing, really." The first courses proceeded with choreographed precision that characterized events at Manhattan's premier venues. Conversations flowed around topics that demonstrated cultural literacy, financial sophistication, and social awareness, the kind of intellectual currency that reinforced membership in exclusive circles while excluding those who couldn't participate fluently. "I have to say," Richard Ford commented during the wine service, "it's refreshing to meet someone who's so forthcoming about their background. Honesty is such a rare quality these days." The emphasis on honesty felt deliberately pointed, as if Richard was delivering a line he'd rehearsed. Jasmine smiled appropriately while mentally reviewing her preparation for the evening's confrontation. Everything was proceeding exactly as she'd anticipated. As dinner concluded and the evening transitioned to speeches, Catherine Ford rose from her seat with confident authority that commanded immediate attention. The ballroom fell silent, except for the gentle clink of crystal and silver, as guests prepared to witness what they assumed would be traditional maternal blessing of their son's romantic choice. "Friends, family, and honored guests," Catherine began, her voice carrying perfectly throughout the acoustically designed space. "Bruce's engagement to Jasmine has been enlightening for our entire family. It's forced us to examine our assumptions about background, breeding, and what we should expect from the people we welcome into our lives." Jasmine felt Bruce shift beside her, his body language changing from protective to predatory as he prepared to participate in what was clearly a coordinated attack. Around the ballroom, conversations ceased as guests recognized they were witnessing something more complex than celebratory platitudes. "I've spent considerable time learning about Jasmine's family history," Catherine continued, consulting notes with theatrical precision, particularly her mother, Ruby Charm, whose career as a so-called civil rights lawyer ended in a tragic car accident in 2008. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop several degrees as Catherine's true intentions became clear. This wasn't a wedding toast. It was a public execution designed to destroy Jasmine's credibility while demonstrating the Ford family's power to protect themselves from unsuitable influences. Ruby Charm spent her final years filing frivolous lawsuits against established New York families and businesses, Catherine continued, her voice carrying authoritative disdain that Manhattan society used to dismiss threats to their comfortable assumptions. She specialized in manufactured discrimination claims, targeting successful companies with nuisance litigation designed to extract settlement payments from organizations that preferred to avoid negative publicity. Around the ballroom, guests shifted uncomfortably as they recognized they were witnessing character assassination disguised as maternal concern. Some seemed horrified by Catherine's cruelty, while others leaned forward with fascinated attention that public humiliation typically attracted from people grateful not to be its target. "The night Ruby Charm died," Catherine said, her voice rising to ensure every guest heard her devastating conclusion. She was reportedly driving under the influence, having spent the evening at a bar in Queens celebrating another manufactured lawsuit against a family whose only crime was building something meaningful in this city. The lies were expertly crafted, designed to transform Ruby Charm from civil rights pioneer into opportunistic alcoholic whose death was the inevitable consequence of her own moral failures. Every word was calculated to humiliate Jasmine while providing Catherine with plausible deniability. She was simply sharing information she'd discovered through legitimate investigation. But Catherine wasn't finished. "And now," she said, looking directly at Jasmine with eyes that held no trace of mercy, "we discover that her daughter has inherited more than just her mother's questionable ethics." Bruce stood slowly, and Jasmine realized with crystalline clarity that he was about to join his mother's attack. The psychological experiment was reaching its climactic moment, the test of whether Bruce Ford would choose love over family loyalty when forced to make an irreversible choice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bruce said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone his mother had used, "I think it's important that everyone here understands exactly what kind of deception we've been dealing with. The betrayal was so complete, so perfectly coordinated, that Jasmine actually felt impressed by its execution." Bruce wasn't just failing to defend her, he was actively participating in her destruction, proving every cynical hypothesis she'd formed about men who could only love from positions of superiority. "Jasmine has spent months lying to me about her background, her education, and her family's history," Bruce continued, consulting notes his mother had obviously provided. "She's manipulated my emotions and exploited my trust to gain access to our family and our resources." The accusations were devastating precisely because they contained elements of truth twisted into weapons. Jasmine had indeed deceived Bruce about her background, though not for the reasons he was suggesting. She had manipulated their relationship, though for purposes far more sophisticated than social climbing. "I tell you this," Bruce concluded, looking directly at her with disappointment that seemed genuinely felt, "not to embarrass anyone, but to remind us all that love requires honesty, and we must be careful about the people we choose to trust with our hearts." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs as guests processed what they'd witnessed. They had expected traditional wedding celebration and found themselves witnessing the systematic destruction of a relationship by two people who clearly believed their audience would validate their cruelty. But Jasmine had not survived 17 years of elite education and 10 years of building a business empire to be destroyed by people whose power was inherited rather than earned. She rose from her chair with movements so controlled they seemed choreographed, every gesture emerging from fury transformed into strategic precision. The psychological experiment was complete. Bruce Ford and his family had revealed exactly who they were when they believed their audience would approve of their cruelty. Now it was time for Jasmine Charm to reveal exactly who she was when her audience was about to discover they had catastrophically underestimated their target. Chapter 6. The Wedding That Never Was. In Manhattan's most exclusive circles, true power is revealed not when someone destroys you, but when you destroy them without losing your composure. The deadly silence in the Park Hyatt ballroom stretched like a razor's edge as 300 of Manhattan's most influential people held their breath, waiting to see how Jasmine Charm would respond to having her character systematically destroyed by the man she was supposed to marry in less than 24 hours. Bruce Ford remained standing beside his chair, consulting the notes his mother had provided for his coordinated attack, while Catherine Ford smiled with the triumphant satisfaction of someone who believed she had just eliminated a threat to her family's social position. Around the ballroom, guests shifted uncomfortably as they recognized they were witnessing something far more brutal than traditional pre-wedding celebration. Jasmine stood slowly, her midnight blue evening gown catching the light from crystal chandeliers that had been positioned to ensure maximum visibility for this moment. Every eye in the ballroom focused on her with the fascinated attention usually reserved for public executions, waiting to see if she would crumble under the weight of such coordinated humiliation. Instead, she smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the acoustically designed space without any trace of the vulnerability Bruce and Catherine had expected to hear. "I want to thank the Ford family for this educational evening." The word educational hung in the air like expensive perfume, present, unmistakable, and somehow more threatening than any accusation could have been. Jasmine wasn't responding like someone who had been exposed and humiliated. She was responding like someone who had gathered exactly the information she needed. "You've shown me exactly who you are when you think your audience will validate your assumptions," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled guests with clinical precision. "And more importantly, you've shown me exactly what you believe about families like mine when you think we can't fight back." Catherine Ford's triumphant expression began to waver as she recognized that Jasmine's response wasn't following the script she had anticipated. This wasn't the tearful retreat of someone overwhelmed by superior social forces. This was something else entirely. "Bruce," Jasmine said, turning to face her fiancé with disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than anger. "Did you really believe that I would agree to marry into a family without researching its history? Did you think I would accept your grandmother's ring without understanding exactly how your grandfather acquired the wealth to purchase it?" Bruce's face went pale as he began to realize that his coordinated attack might have been based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about who held the actual power in their relationship. "The Ford family fortune," Jasmine continued, addressing the entire ballroom with the authority of someone delivering a lecture to students who had failed to complete their homework, was built on systematic discrimination against families who looked like mine. Your grandfather's residential developments displaced hundreds of minority families through illegal practices that my mother spent her final years documenting. The ballroom's social temperature plummeted as guests began to understand they were witnessing something far more complex than family drama. Jasmine wasn't just defending herself. She was exposing systematic practices that many of them had either participated in or profited from indirectly. Ruby Charm died the night before she was scheduled to present evidence of Ford Industries' discriminatory lending practices to a federal grand jury, Jasmine said, her voice growing stronger rather than weaker as she revealed information that transformed the evening's narrative. Her case files disappeared from her office that same night, and the federal investigation was mysteriously closed due to lack of evidence. Catherine Ford's face had gone white as she realized that her carefully orchestrated humiliation was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of destroying Jasmine's credibility, she had provided her with a platform to expose information the Ford family had spent 15 years trying to bury. "But evidence has a way of surviving," Jasmine continued, consulting her phone with the casual efficiency of someone who had planned this moment down to the second. "Especially when someone spends 15 years building the resources and connections necessary to complete her mother's work. Helena Rodriguez, seated at a nearby table, subtly activated recording devices that had been woven throughout the floral arrangements. Every word of this conversation was being documented for potential use in legal proceedings that would extend far beyond personal drama. "I'm calling off our engagement," Jasmine announced, her voice projecting dignified authority that commanded absolute attention from every person in the ballroom. "Not because your family has revealed your true character. I already knew exactly who you were before I accepted your proposal. But because you've now provided me with everything I need to complete my mother's investigation." She removed Bruce's grandmother's emerald ring with movements so controlled they seemed choreographed, placing it gently on the table beside her untouched champagne glass. The gesture was final, irreversible, and witnessed by 300 people who would never forget the evening. They watched a woman choose justice over wealth. "You see," Jasmine said, stepping away from the table to address the entire ballroom, "I didn't come here tonight hoping to join your family. I came here hoping you would reveal exactly who you are when you believe your audience will approve of your cruelty, and you've exceeded even my most cynical expectations." Bruce finally found his voice, but the words came out weak and desperate. "Jasmine, what are you talking about? What investigation?" "The investigation your family thought they had buried with my mother," she replied, consulting her phone again. "The investigation that documented every discriminatory practice Ford Industries employed over 30 years. The investigation that will resume tomorrow morning with the full support of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." The implications of her announcement began rippling through the ballroom as guests realized they had just witnessed the systematic destruction of one of Manhattan's most prominent families by someone they had all underestimated. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jasmine said, her voice carrying to the furthest corners of the ballroom, "I hope you remember this evening exactly as it happened, because everything you've seen and heard tonight will be preserved as evidence in federal civil rights prosecutions that will reshape how business is conducted in this city." She began walking toward the ballroom's exit with unhurried grace, her movement creating a path through guests who parted like water, uncertain whether they were witnessing triumph or the beginning of a catastrophe that would engulf them all. At the ballroom's threshold, she paused to deliver her final words to the scene she was leaving. Catherine Ford's horrified realization, Richard Ford's growing panic, Bruce's devastated comprehension, and 300 members of Manhattan's elite who had just discovered they had been recorded participating in the systematic humiliation of a civil rights attorney's daughter. "Bruce," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "you have no idea what you've lost tonight, but you will." The promise held no anger, no threatened revenge, just calm certainty that suggested knowledge Bruce couldn't access or understand. For the first time that evening, genuine terror flickered across his features as he began to comprehend the magnitude of his family's miscalculation. "Helena," Jasmine said quietly as her chief of staff approached, "make the calls." "All of them?" Helena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Every single one." As Jasmine disappeared into the hotel's marble-appointed corridor, the ballroom remained frozen in stunned silence. The evening that was supposed to eliminate a threat to the Ford family's social position had instead provided their most dangerous enemy with everything she needed to destroy them completely. Bruce remained standing beside his chair, staring at the emerald ring on the table as the full scope of his failure began to crystallize. He had lost the most extraordinary woman he would ever meet, someone who had tested his character and found it so fundamentally lacking that she had used their relationship to gather evidence for his family's prosecution. The psychological experiment was complete. Bruce Ford and his family had failed the test so comprehensively that their failure would become a landmark case in federal civil rights enforcement. But the real education, the one that would teach them the true cost of systematic discrimination, was just beginning. Outside the Park Hyatt, Manhattan's towers pierced the night sky with deceptive beauty, but everything had changed. Jasmine Charm was no longer pretending to be someone she wasn't, and the Ford family was about to discover what happened when you declared war on someone whose power you had never bothered to understand. The wedding that never was had just become the trial of the century. Chapter 7. The Empire Strikes Back. Bruce's Awakening. Wall Street opens at 9:30 a.m., but Manhattan's real power brokers often destroy fortunes long before the markets acknowledge what has already been decided in boardrooms, private clubs, and encrypted phone calls. Bruce Ford's penthouse alarm sounded at 6:30 a.m. on what should have been his wedding day, but the sound that actually woke him was his phone buzzing with urgency that suggested catastrophe rather than celebration. 12 hours after watching the most extraordinary woman he'd ever known call off their engagement and promise his family's destruction, he was about to discover that some mistakes carry price tags that even trust fund beneficiaries can't afford to pay. "Bruce, we have a problem." His father's voice carried barely controlled panic that Richard Ford had never displayed during 30 years of navigating corporate challenges. Ford Industries stock is down 23% in pre-market trading. Bruce sat up in bed, his mind still processing the cognitive dissonance between waking up alone on his wedding day and receiving news about financial catastrophe that seemed directly connected to the woman who had walked away from him with such devastating finality. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story this morning titled "Ford Industries, 3 Generations of Discriminatory Practices." Richard continued, his voice cracking slightly. "They have documents, Bruce, internal memos, email communications, rental application policies, everything we thought was buried after Ruby Charm died." Through his penthouse windows, Manhattan looked exactly as it had yesterday morning, glittering with promise, infinite with possibility, indifferent to human suffering. But Bruce was beginning to understand that the woman he'd lost had the power to transform that indifference into active hostility. "How is that possible?" Bruce asked, though the growing certainty in his chest suggested he already knew the answer. "Ruby Charm died in 2008. Her files were supposedly destroyed. Apparently someone preserved everything," Richard replied, with grim recognition of how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. "Someone with resources, connections, and patience spent 15 years preparing for this moment. Bruce, I need you to think very carefully about everything Jasmine told you last night." The psychological inventory was devastating. Jasmine had announced her intention to resume her mother's investigation, had referenced federal support that suggested months or years of preparation, and had spoken with the authority of someone who possessed comprehensive evidence rather than fragmentary accusations. More troubling, she had specifically stated that Bruce's family had provided her with everything she needed to complete her mother's work. The rehearsal dinner hadn't been the beginning of her investigation. It had been its culmination. Regret incident number 1, the financial earthquake. "The scope is unprecedented," Richard continued, his voice growing more strained with each detail. "Every major institutional investor is dumping our stock. CalPERS, New York State teachers, AFL-CIO. They're all citing reputational concerns based on systematic discrimination allegations." Bruce pulled on clothes with mechanical efficiency while reviewing the Wall Street Journal article on his phone. The documentation was comprehensive. Internal emails discussing undesirable tenant demographics, rental procedures designed to exclude minority applicants, coordinated strategies for gentrifying neighborhoods through selective property acquisition. Most devastating were personal notes in his grandfather's handwriting, discussing Ruby Charm's investigation as a threat to family financial security that required immediate resolution. The implication was unmistakable, even if the language maintained plausible deniability about specific methods. "How much are we down?" Bruce asked, though he dreaded the answer. 400 million in market capitalization as of an hour ago, but that's just the beginning. The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened a formal investigation, and 3 different federal agencies are coordinating what appears to be a comprehensive review of our business practices going back 30 years. Bruce's first regret crystallized like acid in his stomach. I lost the woman who could have protected me from this because I chose to attack her instead of defending her. She offered me love, and I responded with betrayal, coordinated by people whose crimes she was investigating. Regret incident number 2, the social exile. By noon, the financial devastation had expanded into systematic social exile that suggested coordination far beyond organic response to negative publicity. Bruce arrived at Ford Industries' Manhattan headquarters to find a building in crisis mode, with employees fielding media inquiries and investor concerns that had multiplied exponentially overnight. "The Union Club has revoked our membership," Richard reported when Bruce reached the executive conference room. "The Museum of Natural History has asked me to resign from their board. 3 different charity organizations have returned our recent donations." The social exile was happening with precision that suggested someone with comprehensive understanding of Manhattan's power structures was methodically destroying Ford family access to the exclusive networks that maintained their influence beyond mere financial resources. "Who has that kind of reach?" Bruce asked, though the question felt increasingly rhetorical. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael Torres, his Harvard roommate who now worked in private equity. "Dude, are you insane? Do you know who Jasmine actually is? Call me immediately." The conversation that followed fundamentally altered Bruce's understanding of reality. According to Michael's connections in Manhattan's financial community, Jasmine Charm was not just connected to a private equity empire, she was its primary controller, operating through a network so complex that most people had never identified her as its actual architect. "Charm Enterprises," Michael explained, his voice carrying awed recognition usually reserved for discussing legendary business figures. "They own or control probably 60% of Manhattan's luxury hospitality industry. Hotels, restaurants, event venues, private clubs. If your family has spent money anywhere significant in the city, you've probably been paying her." Bruce's second regret hit him like a physical blow. "I spent 8 months taking her to restaurants she owned, introducing her to clubs she controlled, patronizing establishments where she wielded more actual power than my family name had ever carried. She was documenting every moment of my condescension while owning the entire world I thought I was generously sharing with her." Regret incident number 3, the truth about Ruby. That afternoon, Detective Sarah Morgan from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office called to schedule an interview regarding Ford family business practices and their potential connection to Ruby Charm's death. The investigation was expanding beyond financial irregularities into potential criminal conspiracy. "New evidence suggests that Ms. Charm's accident may not have been accidental," Detective Morgan explained. "We have documents indicating that Ford Industries representatives met with unknown individuals the night before her death, and that her case files disappeared under circumstances that warrant federal investigation." The revelation struck Bruce like lightning. His family hadn't just profited from systematic discrimination, they had potentially murdered the woman who tried to expose it. And he had spent the previous evening participating in the public humiliation of her daughter's memory. "We also have recordings from last night's event," Detective Morgan continued. "Your statements about Ms. Charm's supposed deceptions, combined with your mother's character assassination of Ruby Charm, constitute potential evidence of conspiracy to obstruct justice and civil rights violations." Bruce's third regret exploded in his consciousness with devastating clarity. "I participated in destroying the memory of a woman my family may have murdered, and I did it in front of 300 witnesses who were being recorded for evidence. Jasmine didn't just call off our wedding, she documented my family's confession to federal crimes. Regret incident number 4. The strategic revelation. Late that evening, as Bruce sat alone in his penthouse surrounded by family photographs that now felt like evidence of inherited guilt, he received an email containing a Forbes article titled "The Phantom Billionaire, America's Most Secretive Female CEO." The photograph was a silhouette, but Bruce recognized the elegant bearing and quiet authority that he had attributed to confidence developed through their relationship rather than power she had always possessed. The article documented an empire that dwarfed most Fortune 500 companies while remaining virtually invisible to public scrutiny. Most devastating was a sidebar titled "The Ruby Charm Legacy: How One Woman's Death Became Her Daughter's Mission." The article revealed that Jasmine had spent 15 years building resources and connections necessary to complete her mother's investigation, while simultaneously transforming herself into one of Manhattan's most powerful people. Dr. Charm's romantic relationship with Ford Industries heir Bruce Ford, the article concluded, appears to have been a strategic component of her investigation rather than coincidental personal involvement. Sources suggest that Ford family responses to Ms. Charm during their engagement provided crucial evidence for federal prosecutors. Bruce's fourth and final regret settled into his bones like radioactive poison. "I had the most extraordinary woman in Manhattan, someone who was intellectually, financially, and morally superior to me in every measurable way. She spent 8 months testing whether I could love an equal, and when I failed that test so completely that I attacked her instead of defending her, she used my failure as evidence to destroy everything my family had built through systematic oppression." As he finished reading, Bruce finally understood the true scope of what had happened. Jasmine hadn't just called off their engagement, she had completed a 15-year mission to avenge her mother's death, while simultaneously testing whether someone raised in privilege could ever transcend the limitations of inherited supremacy. His comprehensive failure to pass that test was about to cost his family everything they had accumulated through 3 generations of systematic discrimination. The psychological experiment was complete, and Bruce Ford had failed so spectacularly that his failure would become a landmark case in federal civil rights enforcement. Outside his office windows, the city continued its relentless pace, while somewhere among those steel and glass towers, Jasmine Charm was orchestrating the systematic dismantling of everything Bruce had inherited but never earned. The true education in consequences was just beginning. Chapter 8. The Truth Unveiled. Bruce's Deeper Regrets. Forbes magazine's investigative journalism unit had built their reputation by exposing the hidden architectures of American wealth, but their November cover story would set new standards for revelations that reshaped public understanding of how power actually operates in Manhattan's elite circles. Dr. Jasmine Charm's silhouette graced newsstands across Manhattan 72 hours after she had called off her engagement to Bruce Ford, but the woman featured in The Phantom Billionaire, America's Most Secretive Female CEO, bore no resemblance to the grateful Queens College graduate Bruce had believed he was elevating into his family's social circle. The article, released simultaneously across digital and print platforms, documented an empire that dwarfed most Fortune 500 companies, while remaining virtually invisible to public scrutiny. Charm Enterprises controlled $3.2 billion in assets through a network of shell companies, private equity funds, and strategic partnerships that had quietly reshaped Manhattan's luxury hospitality industry over the past decade. Bruce read the Forbes profile in his penthouse office, while Ford Industries stock continued its free fall toward penny stock status, each paragraph revealing layers of strategic deception so sophisticated that his 8-month relationship began resembling an anthropological study rather than romantic courtship. Subject demonstrates classical symptoms of inherited privilege syndrome. He read from what appeared to be academic notes quoted in the article. Romantic partner selection consistently favors individuals perceived as intellectually and financially inferior, unable to maintain emotional connection when presented with evidence of target's actual capabilities and social position. The clinical language suggested Jasmine had been documenting their relationship with the detached precision of a researcher studying predictable behavioral patterns in laboratory subjects. Every condescending gesture, every patronizing explanation, every moment of assumed authority had apparently been catalogued as evidence for conclusions she had reached before accepting his proposal. His phone buzzed with a call from Amanda Sterling, whose warnings about inconsistencies in Jasmine's background now seemed prophetic rather than paranoid. "Have you seen the Forbes article?" Amanda asked without preamble, her voice carrying grim satisfaction that comes from being proven right about something you hope to be wrong about. "I'm reading it now," Bruce replied, scrolling through sections that described Jasmine's actual educational background. Not Queen's College, but Columbia University with a PhD in economics, followed by Harvard Business School, where she had graduated first in her class before disappearing from public view to build her empire in calculated anonymity. "She played all of us," Amanda continued. "Every social event, every charity function, every exclusive gathering. She was studying Manhattan's elite like laboratory specimens while we assumed she was grateful for inclusion. The level of psychological manipulation is actually remarkable." The article included a timeline that recontextualized every significant moment of Bruce's relationship with devastating precision. Their first meeting hadn't been a job interview. It had been the beginning of an experiment designed to test whether men raised in privilege could ever love women as equals when their superiority was systematically challenged. "According to my sources," Amanda said, "she's been planning this for years. Ruby Charm's death wasn't an accident. It was assassination, designed to prevent her from exposing systematic discrimination. Jasmine spent 15 years building resources and connections necessary to complete her mother's work, while simultaneously testing whether powerful men could evolve beyond their inherited assumptions." The implication struck Bruce like a physical blow. His family hadn't just profited from systematic discrimination, they had potentially murdered the woman who tried to expose it, and Jasmine had used their romantic relationship to gather evidence for prosecution while simultaneously testing his character. "How is that possible?" Bruce asked, though he was beginning to understand that his assumptions about power, justice, and social hierarchies had been systematically naive. "Money, intelligence, and patience," Amanda replied. She built her empire by understanding exactly how Manhattan's power structures operate, then infiltrating them so thoroughly that she could document discriminatory practices across every exclusive venue while remaining invisible to the people she was investigating. The Forbes article included photographs of internal documents from dozens of Manhattan's most prestigious establishments. Rental applications with coded language for racial screening, membership policies designed to exclude specific demographics, and coordinated strategies for maintaining social segregation through seemingly legitimate business practices. Most devastating were transcripts from the rehearsal dinner, where Bruce's participation in attacking Jasmine had been captured by surveillance equipment woven throughout the floral arrangements. His own words, condemning the woman he had claimed to love, were preserved as evidence of his character when tested by authentic moral challenge. "She recorded everything," Amanda said, her voice carrying equal parts admiration and horror. "Every racist comment, every casual dismissal, every moment when Manhattan's elite revealed their true character, when they believed their audience would validate their assumptions, including your speech attacking her credibility." Bruce's laptop chimed with an email from an address he didn't recognize. "Mr. Ford, this is Janet Rodriguez with the Washington Post investigative team. We're preparing a comprehensive series about systematic discrimination in Manhattan's elite social networks. Would you be available for an interview regarding your family's business practices and your public statements about Ruby Charm and her daughter? The media feeding frenzy was accelerating as journalists recognized they were documenting the systematic exposure of practices that had remained hidden for decades. Someone had provided major news organizations with enough evidence to support months of investigative reporting about how Manhattan's wealthiest families maintained their position through coordinated exclusion and discrimination. "There's something else," Amanda said, her voice dropping to the kind of whisper usually reserved for discussing genuinely dangerous information. "I've been hearing rumors that the Justice Department has been building cases against systematic housing discrimination for years, but they needed evidence and witnesses. Jasmine has apparently provided both, along with enough financial resources to support prosecutions that could continue for decades." Bruce felt his chest tighten as he considered the implications. If Jasmine had spent 15 years documenting systematic discrimination across Manhattan's elite circles, then his participation in publicly attacking her character hadn't just been morally reprehensible, it had been a confession recorded for potential use in federal civil rights prosecutions. What kind of prosecutions? Criminal charges for civil rights violations, financial penalties that could bankrupt entire families, prison sentences for systematic discrimination that spans decades, and all of it supported by someone with enough resources to fund the most comprehensive civil rights investigation in Manhattan's history. The scope of potential legal consequences began crystallizing in Bruce's mind. His family could face criminal charges that would result in prison sentences, while financial penalties could strip away every asset they had accumulated over 3 generations of inherited privilege. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. "The Ruby Charm Foundation cordially invites you to attend our annual Justice Gala, honoring 15 years of fighting systematic racism in Manhattan's housing and business communities. Your presence is particularly requested given your recent public statements. RSVP essential." The invitation felt less like social courtesy than legal summons. Jasmine was apparently prepared to confront Bruce in a public setting where his response would be documented and preserved as evidence of his character when forced to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. "Are you going?" Amanda asked when he described the invitation. "I don't think I have a choice," Bruce replied, understanding that refusing to attend would be interpreted as admission of guilt, while attending would force him to confront the full scope of what his family had done and what Jasmine had become. That evening, alone in his penthouse with Manhattan's skyline visible beyond windows that no longer projected possibility but rather judgment, Bruce attempted to process the complete reversal of everything he had believed about his relationship, his family, and himself. The woman he had attacked as a gold-digging deceiver was revealed to be a billionaire whose mother had died investigating crimes his family had committed. The psychological experiment he had failed so completely had documented his character with scientific precision, while the social exile he was experiencing had been orchestrated by someone who understood Manhattan's power structures better than families who had inhabited them for generations. But the most devastating realization was personal rather than financial or legal. For 8 months, Bruce had enjoyed the emotional satisfaction of believing he was elevating someone who needed his guidance. In reality, he had been the subject being studied by someone superior to him in every measurable way. Jasmine Charm had never needed his rescue. She had simply wanted to know if he was capable of loving an equal, of defending someone he loved when that defense required courage over comfort. His comprehensive failure to pass that test, culminating in his active participation in attacking her character, was about to cost him everything his family had built through systematic oppression of families like hers. The psychological experiment was complete, but the education in justice was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Hunt for Redemption, 3 Impossible Conditions. The Ruby Charm Foundation's annual Justice Gala occupied the entire 15th floor of Manhattan's Museum of Social History, where America's most powerful civil rights leaders gathered annually to honor those who had died fighting systematic oppression and to confront those who had perpetuated it. Bruce Ford adjusted his black tie with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly as he approached the museum's entrance, knowing he was walking into a confrontation that would either offer the possibility of redemption or confirm his complete moral bankruptcy. 3 weeks had passed since Jasmine had called off their engagement and announced his family's prosecution. 3 weeks of financial hemorrhaging and social exile that had reduced the Ford family empire to a case study in how inherited privilege could be systematically dismantled by someone with superior intelligence and infinite patience. The gala's guest list read like a directory of American moral authority: federal judges who had shaped civil rights jurisprudence, university presidents who had integrated elite institutions, corporate leaders who had transformed discriminatory industries through strategic pressure. Bruce recognized several faces from television interviews and congressional hearings, people whose approval carried more social weight than all of Manhattan's exclusive clubs combined. Mr. Ford. A security guard approached with professional courtesy that barely concealed suspicion. Dr. Charm asked me to escort you to the reception area when you arrived. The museum's architectural grandeur had been designed to inspire contemplation of historical progress, but tonight it felt more like a courtroom where Bruce would be forced to confront crimes he had inherited and choices he had made. Display cases along the corridors showcased artifacts from civil rights campaigns, legal documents from landmark discrimination cases, photographs of peaceful protesters being brutalized by authorities, personal belongings of activists who had died pursuing justice that privileged families like his had systematically opposed. The reception area hummed with conversations conducted in carefully modulated tones that suggested substance rather than social performance. These weren't people networking for business advantage or social positioning. They were professionals whose careers had been built on transforming systemic inequality through strategic intelligence and coordinated action. Bruce Ford. The voice belonged to Congresswoman Maya Washington, whose civil rights legislation had reshaped federal housing policy over the past decade. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your public statements at the rehearsal dinner have provided excellent case studies for understanding how privilege responds to moral challenge. The greeting carried no hostility, just clinical interest in examining a phenomenon she had spent years studying from an academic perspective. Bruce was apparently being treated not as a person, but as a representative example of how inherited advantage functioned when confronted with consequences. Congresswoman Washington, Bruce replied, attempting to project respect while recognizing that his reputation had preceded him into every conversation he would have tonight. I'm honored to meet you, though I understand the circumstances are complicated. Complicated is one word for it, she replied, consulting notes on her phone with efficiency of someone accustomed to documenting everything for potential legal use. Your coordinated attack on Jasmine Charm's character has become required viewing in my civil rights law seminars. It's remarkable how thoroughly privileged people reveal their true nature when they believe their actions will be validated by their peer group. The casual reference to his participation in humiliating Jasmine suggested that Bruce's moral failure had become educational material for future generations of civil rights lawyers and social justice advocates. His cruelty had been preserved as a teaching tool for understanding how systematic oppression operated in supposedly enlightened social circles. I deeply regret what happened that night, Bruce said, though the words felt inadequate given the magnitude of what he was attempting to address. Do you? Congresswoman Washington's question carried genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Because regret implies understanding of wrongdoing, and understanding implies recognition of harm caused. Most people in your position express regret about consequences rather than actions. Before Bruce could respond, the reception area's conversations gradually ceased as attention focused on someone entering from the museum's main elevator bank. Jasmine Charm moved through the crowd with natural authority that comes from genuine respect rather than inherited position, greeting civil rights leaders and federal officials with familiarity that suggested ongoing professional relationships. She wore a black evening gown that projected power rather than fashion, her mother's pearl earrings the only jewelry that suggested personal rather than professional significance. Every gesture conveyed confidence earned through achievement rather than comfort inherited through privilege, and Bruce finally understood the complete scope of what he had lost through his moral cowardice. "Ladies and gentlemen," the museum director announced, "Dr. Jasmine Charm will be presenting this year's Ruby Charm Memorial Address, honoring 15 years of continued progress in civil rights advocacy and social justice reform." The audience's applause carried sustained enthusiasm, usually reserved for people who had earned legendary status through consistent achievement over extended periods. Jasmine wasn't just wealthy, she was respected by people whose approval couldn't be purchased through charitable donations or social connections. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying easily throughout the reception area without requiring amplification. 15 years ago, my mother died the night before she was scheduled to present evidence of systematic housing discrimination to a federal grand jury. Her case files disappeared, her investigation was closed, and the families she had been fighting to protect were left without legal representation. The assembled crowd listened with focused attention that suggested they understood they were witnessing something historically significant rather than ceremonial platitudes. "Tonight, I'm proud to announce that those case files have been recovered, that investigation has been reopened, and the families my mother died protecting will finally receive the justice they have been denied for 15 years. Jasmine's gaze found Bruce across the crowded room, holding his attention with steady pressure that felt like a physical force. "We have also identified the individuals and institutions responsible for obstructing that investigation, and they will be held accountable for their actions." The applause was thunderous, sustained for nearly 2 minutes as America's civil rights establishment celebrated what they recognized as a landmark victory against systematic oppression. Bruce stood frozen as he realized he was witnessing the announcement of his family's formal prosecution for crimes they had assumed would remain buried forever. "But justice isn't just about punishment," Jasmine continued. "It's about transformation, education, and the possibility that people can choose to become better than their worst actions. That's why the Ruby Charm Foundation is offering opportunities for restorative justice to individuals who demonstrate genuine commitment to repairing the harm they have caused." The shift in tone suggested Bruce might be offered alternatives to criminal prosecution, though he suspected any such opportunities would come with conditions designed to test whether his regret was genuine or merely strategic response to consequences he couldn't avoid. After the formal presentations concluded, Bruce found himself approached by Helena Rodriguez, whom he had met months earlier as Jasmine's supposed supervisor, but now recognized as her chief of staff and closest advisor. "Dr. Charm will see you now," Helena said, her tone carrying professional courtesy without any trace of the deference she had displayed during their previous encounters. "She's waiting in the museum's civil rights archive." The archive occupied a climate-controlled section of the museum's research facilities where original documents from landmark discrimination cases were preserved for academic study and public education. Ruby Charm's case files occupied several display cases, their contents illuminated under museum-quality lighting that revealed the methodical precision with which she had documented Ford Industries' discriminatory practices. Jasmine stood before a display containing her mother's final legal briefs, studying documents that had been hidden for 15 years while their author's reputation was systematically destroyed by people who had profited from the crimes she had attempted to expose. She was 43 years old, Jasmine said without turning around. Brilliant legal mind, devoted mother, passionate advocate for people who had no other representation. She died believing that justice was possible if enough people cared enough to fight for it. Bruce approached carefully, recognizing that this conversation would determine whether he had any possibility of earning Jasmine's forgiveness, or whether his moral education would conclude with criminal prosecution and social exile. "I know nothing I say can undo what my family did to your mother," he began, though he suspected that acknowledgement of wrongdoing would be insufficient given the magnitude of harm caused. "But I want you to know that I understand now how completely I failed you when you needed me most. I had the chance to defend the woman I loved, and instead I joined the attack against you. Do you understand why you failed?" Jasmine turned to face him, her expression neutral, but her attention focused with intensity of someone evaluating whether transformation was possible or whether some people were irredeemable. Because understanding requires more than recognizing that you made the wrong choice. It requires recognizing why you were psychologically incapable of making the right choice. The conversation's direction became clear with devastating precision. This wasn't negotiation about legal consequences. It was examination of whether Bruce possessed the psychological capacity to love people as equals rather than projects requiring his salvation or superiority. "I've spent 8 months studying your character," Jasmine continued, "documenting your psychological patterns, analyzing whether men raised in privilege can ever escape the prison of their own superiority complex. Your performance at the rehearsal dinner provided conclusive results." "And those results were?" Bruce asked, though he dreaded confirmation of what he suspected he had revealed about himself. "That you are psychologically incapable of loving a woman you perceive as your equal," Jasmine replied with clinical precision that made her conclusion more devastating than emotional accusation would have been. "More than that, you are incapable of protecting someone you love. When that protection requires choosing them over your family's approval, you can only maintain emotional connection when you feel superior to your romantic partner." The psychological evaluation was so accurate that Bruce couldn't formulate coherent response. His participation in attacking Jasmine at the rehearsal dinner had been catalogued as definitive evidence of his fundamental inability to love without power differential. "However," Jasmine said, consulting notes on her phone, "the Ruby Charm Foundation believes in the possibility of redemption through genuine transformation rather than punishment alone. We're prepared to offer you an opportunity to demonstrate whether your regret represents authentic growth or merely strategic response to consequences you can't avoid." Bruce felt something resembling hope for the first time in weeks. "What kind of opportunity?" "3 conditions," Jasmine replied, her tone carrying formal precision of someone presenting legal terms rather than personal negotiations. "Complete all 3 within 1 year, and we'll discuss the possibility of rebuilding trust between us. Fail any of them, and you'll be prosecuted to the full extent of federal civil rights law." The stakes were clear: transformation through genuine suffering or destruction through legal prosecution, with no middle ground for partial compliance or strategic compromise. "First condition," Jasmine said, reading from her phone, "public confession. You will testify voluntarily to federal investigators about every discriminatory practice Ford Industries has employed over 30 years. No lawyer-negotiated immunity, no strategic omissions, no protection of family reputation at the expense of truth." Bruce nodded, though he recognized that confession would result in criminal charges for his parents and potential prosecution for himself as an accessory after the fact. Second condition, complete financial restitution. You will liquidate your entire inheritance, trust funds, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, everything, and distribute the proceeds to families displaced by Ford Industries' discriminatory practices over 3 decades. The financial penalty would reduce Bruce to actual poverty, stripping away every material advantage he had inherited while forcing him to rebuild his life through personal effort rather than family wealth. Third condition, Jasmine concluded, is the most important. You will spend 1 full year working minimum wage jobs in service industries, experiencing the economic insecurity faced by people your family has systematically exploited. No family connections, no networking opportunities, no shortcuts back to privilege. The year of poverty would force Bruce to understand dignity in labor, rather than assuming that service work was evidence of personal failure or limited ambition. He would learn to navigate systems designed to trap working people in cycles of dependency, experiencing firsthand the challenges faced by families his company had displaced. These conditions aren't punishment, Jasmine said, studying his reaction with intensity of someone evaluating whether genuine transformation was possible. They're education. If you complete them successfully, you'll become someone capable of loving equals rather than projects. Someone who can defend the people you love when defense requires courage over comfort. Bruce considered the choice she was offering. Transformation through genuine hardship that might earn her forgiveness, or destruction through legal prosecution that would strip away everything while providing no possibility of redemption. "I accept your conditions," he said, understanding that he was choosing potential reconciliation over certain destruction, though both paths would require abandoning everything he had believed about himself and his place in the world. "You have 365 days, Jasmine replied, checking her watch with precision that suggested she had been calculating timelines for this moment. "Beginning tomorrow morning. After that, we'll discover whether you've learned to love people as humans rather than as opportunities to feel superior." As Bruce left the museum that night, Manhattan's skyline glittered with the same deceptive beauty it had displayed throughout his life. But everything had changed. He was no longer the heir to a fortune built on other people's displacement. He was someone who had chosen the possibility of earning Jasmine's love over the certainty of losing everything without hope of redemption. The next 365 days would determine whether that choice would lead to reconciliation or merely confirm that some people were incapable of escaping the prisons they had inherited. The hunt for Jasmine's forgiveness was about to begin. Chapter 10. The Reunion. Day 365. The Riverside Memorial Garden in Queens held no marble monuments or gilded inscriptions, just simple headstones marking lives that had mattered to people who couldn't afford to purchase immortality through architectural grandeur. Bruce Ford knelt beside Ruby Charm's grave holding flowers he'd bought with money-earned washing dishes at a diner in the Bronx, his hands bearing calluses that 12 months of minimum wage labor had etched into permanent reminders of dignity discovered through honest work. The man who had participated in publicly humiliating Ruby's memory at Manhattan's most exclusive venue now understood the cost of the transformation he'd completed. Everything he'd inherited, everything he'd assumed about himself, everything that had made him feel superior to the woman whose daughter had offered him a chance at redemption he hadn't deserved. "I kept them," he said quietly, placing the flowers against the headstone's modest granite surface. "Every condition, every requirement, every test. I don't know if it's enough to earn Jasmine's forgiveness, but I know I'm not the same person who betrayed her trust 365 days ago." The federal confession had resulted in criminal charges for his parents and the complete dissolution of Ford Industries. Richard and Catherine Ford were serving concurrent sentences for civil rights violations and conspiracy to obstruct justice, while Bruce's testimony had provided evidence that ensured 3 other Manhattan families would face similar prosecutions for systematic discrimination. The financial restitution had liquidated every asset he'd inherited. The Tribeca penthouse sold to fund legal aid organizations, the trust funds distributed to families displaced by Ford Industries' predatory practices, the investment portfolios converted into educational scholarships for students whose backgrounds resembled Jasmine's fabricated story rather than his actual privilege. But the year of minimum wage work had been the most educational component of his transformation. Washing dishes, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, serving customers who treated him with the same casual dismissal he'd once directed toward people in service positions. Learning to budget carefully, to navigate bureaucratic systems designed to trap working people in cycles of dependency, to find dignity in labor that privileged people dismissed as evidence of personal failure. "Mr. Ford?" The voice belonged to Maya Washington, whose civil rights legislation had been strengthened by evidence from Ruby Charm's recovered case files. "Jasmine asked me to meet you here." Bruce stood, recognizing that this final conversation would determine whether his year of transformation had been sufficient to earn the possibility of Jasmine's forgiveness, or whether some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome. "Congresswoman Washington," he said, noting how different their dynamic felt now that he possessed nothing except what he'd earned through personal effort rather than inherited advantage. "Thank you for coming." "She wanted a witness," Maya explained, consulting her phone with efficiency of someone whose time was allocated to maximum social impact. "Someone who could evaluate whether your transformation was genuine or whether you'd simply learned to perform contrition without actually changing your character. The evaluation would be conducted by someone whose expertise in recognizing authentic transformation versus strategic performance had been developed through decades of civil rights advocacy. Bruce understood that his year of self-imposed poverty would be meaningless if it hadn't produced fundamental changes in how he related to other people. "Tell me what you learned," Maya said, though her tone suggested this was examination rather than conversation. "I learned that I'd never truly loved anyone," Bruce replied, because 12 months of genuine hardship had stripped away the comfortable illusions that privilege had allowed him to maintain. "I'd loved the feeling of being needed, of being superior, of having something to offer that made me feel valuable. But I'd never loved someone enough to defend them when defense required courage over comfort." The admission carried precision that suggested extensive self-examination rather than surface-level recognition of wrongdoing. Maya nodded approvingly, recognizing authentic insight into psychological patterns that most privileged people spent lifetimes avoiding. "And now?" she asked. "Now I understand that love requires seeing other people as completely human rather than opportunities to feel better about yourself," Bruce continued. "But more than that, I understand that love requires courage. The courage to protect the people you love, even when it costs you something important. Jasmine never needed my elevation, but she needed my loyalty, and I failed her when it mattered most." Before Maya could respond, they both turned toward the sound of footsteps approaching along the Memorial Gardens gravel pathway. Jasmine Charm walked toward them wearing simple clothes that projected authority through presence rather than expense, her bearing suggesting someone who had achieved everything she'd wanted, except the one thing that couldn't be purchased through strategic intelligence or accumulated wealth. "Congresswoman Washington," Jasmine said, embracing Maya with warmth that suggested genuine friendship rather than professional alliance. "Thank you for witnessing this." "Of course," Maya replied, though her attention remained focused on Bruce with intensity of someone evaluating whether transformation was possible or whether some people remained fundamentally unchanged regardless of consequences they experienced. "Bruce," Jasmine said, acknowledging him with neutral courtesy she might extend to any stranger whose presence required polite recognition without personal investment. The psychological distance between them felt infinite despite their physical proximity. Bruce understood that completing her conditions had been necessary but insufficient, earning the right to this conversation without guaranteeing any particular outcome from it. "I wanted to say thank you," he began, recognizing that gratitude was the only appropriate response to someone who had offered him opportunities for transformation he hadn't deserved. "You could have destroyed me completely, but instead you gave me the chance to become someone worthy of your respect, even if I can never earn your love again." "You're wrong about one thing," Jasmine replied with precision that suggested careful consideration of language and meaning. "I never stopped loving you." The revelation struck Bruce like a physical force, though he recognized that her love had been conditional on his transformation rather than acceptance of his limitations. She had loved his potential rather than his reality, demanding that he become worthy of that love through genuine growth rather than strategic performance. "But I needed to know if you could become someone capable of protecting the people you love," she continued, "not protecting them from weakness or poverty, but protecting them from the people who would destroy them for being different, for challenging assumptions, for demanding justice." Bruce understood that she was describing the fundamental test he had failed so completely at their rehearsal dinner, his inability to defend someone he loved when that defense required choosing her over his family's approval. "I love who you've become," he said, meaning every word while recognizing that his love was now based on admiration for her strength, rather than gratitude for her apparent dependence. "But more than that, I love who you've always been. Your brilliance, your courage, your commitment to justice. I love that you saw potential in me that I couldn't see in myself, and that you demanded I become worthy of it." "The Ruby Charm Foundation has established a new program," Jasmine said, "providing resources for people who want to transform inherited privilege into social justice advocacy. The program requires participants to spend significant time understanding systems they've benefited from, then working to reform those systems for everyone's benefit." The offer represented opportunity for Bruce to channel his experience into meaningful work, rather than simply returning to privilege with enhanced psychological awareness. He could become someone who helped other privileged people navigate transformation rather than someone who had simply survived his own education. "I'd be honored to participate," Bruce said, understanding that this work would provide purpose that purely personal redemption couldn't offer. "I want to help other people avoid the mistakes I made, and I want to support the kind of systemic change that would have prevented my family from causing the harm we caused." "Then we'll be working together," Jasmine said, extending her hand with formal gesture that suggested professional partnership rather than romantic reunion. "As equals." Bruce took her hand, feeling the possibility of relationship built on mutual respect rather than power differential. But as their hands touched, Jasmine's professional composure softened slightly. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice carrying personal warmth rather than institutional authority. "Watching you complete those conditions, seeing you choose growth over comfort, observing you become someone who could defend the people you love, it's been the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. You've become the man I always hoped you could be." The acknowledgement carried weight that purely professional recognition couldn't provide. Bruce had not only transformed himself, but had given Jasmine evidence that people could change fundamentally when offered appropriate motivation and genuine consequences. "Does that mean," Bruce began, hardly daring to hope. "It means," Jasmine said, stepping closer, "that I'm ready to find out what we can build together when two people love each other as equals, when both people have the courage to defend what matters most." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that a year of honest labor had etched around his eyes. "I fell in love with your potential, Bruce, but now I'm in love with who you've actually become." The kiss that followed was different from any they had shared during their deception-laden courtship. This was the kiss between two people who had seen each other's worst moments and chosen love over comfort, growth over stagnation, justice over privilege. When they separated, Bruce saw his reflection in her eyes and recognized someone he had never been before, a man worthy of loving the most extraordinary woman he had ever known. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we get to work," Jasmine replied, taking his hand as they began walking from her mother's grave toward the city that sparkled in the distance. "We have a foundation to run, privileged people to educate, and a world to change. Together." Behind them, Ruby Charm's memorial stood as testament that justice delayed is not justice denied, that love can survive the complete destruction of its foundational illusions, and that redemption is possible for people willing to abandon everything they've inherited to become everything they're capable of being. The year of separation was over. The lifetime of partnership was about to begin.